My husband, he's unfortunately passed away. And my spoiled stepdaughter, she's trying to sue me now for all his assets and all the net worth that he left to me. Well, I'm not gonna let that fly. I thought I was going to get the best lawyer and fight this, but it seems she has a trick up her sleeve, and you won't believe what it was.
Hello everybody. I'm a physically challenged woman who stays in Knoxville, Tennessee. I'm a 45-year-old and recently lost my 55-year-old husband, Tony. We'd been married for nearly 15 years before he passed away earlier this year. We have no kids of our own, but Tony had a child from his previous marriage that we spoiled absolutely rotten. And after his death, she has become my bane of existence. But I need to give a bit more context to explain why she has turned against me. The first time I met Tony was after school at the principal's office. Miranda had bunked a school test and gone on a road trip with her friend Nicole. It was an Algebra 2 midterm. Even Nicole's mother was called to the principal's office, and principal was already mad at Nicole for her irregular attendance. Tony just silently sat through the whole discussion, staring at his daughter. I caught up to them after the meeting to tell them it was not a big deal as it is, just being made out to be. Generally, kids fail these midterms, so they could write with them. Also, if Miranda had grown confident enough to do such daring acts of rebellishness after her trauma, he should be proud. Tony just laughed at my words and thanked me. He would go ahead and tell me later on that he had decided to ask me out back then itself. We also bumped into each other at a bar where we mostly talked about Miranda. You see, there was a tension in the air, but both of us did not acknowledge it, and we both did not want to cross the line. He, especially after the incident in his own life, he thought of himself to be cursed. He even told stories later on about how many of his close friends and dates that he faced freaked accidents and misfortunes after hanging out with him. I told him he did not need to worry about me because I was, quote, called a lady luck by almost everyone in my life. That is when we started talking about our lives. This was when he told me about his ex-wife, Racheal. You see, Tony was married to his high school sweetheart, Racheal, when they were 21 years of age. This was because Racheal was already pregnant. Both her parents did not want the child to be born out of wedlock, and Tony simply did not want to become a father at a young age, but Racheal basically gaslit him into becoming one. Tony's parents are very, very wealthy, and they saw Racheal's decision as a way for her to take advantage of their son. But Tony did not want his first love to be abandoned, so he fought against his own parents and finally convinced them to let them be married. This also meant he had to commit, to being a husband and a father at the young age of 21. But he worked his heart off in his father's company, and 9 months later, Racheal gave birth to a baby girl named Miranda. Seeing their grandchild, Tony's parent melted down and helped him out with his career. His father invested in his own business and even helped with the mortgage on the new house. Racheal, however, after giving birth, had prolonged health complications. The labor was very intense, and finally they had to perform a C-section. She had very bad mood swings and even developed quite bad tension headaches. So she had turned very irritable to everyone around her. This has also put an extra layer of stress on Tony that he was not prepared for. Miranda, however, grew up to be quite a healthy child, but she had constant fights and arguments with her mother. Racheal, due to her health, was not able to deal with the tantrums and high energy of a toddler. These fights would lead to Miranda being beaten up for some reason or the other, but Racheal would apologize and hug her kid immediately. It was a turbulent childhood that left Miranda very confused feelings about her mother, but when she was nearly 10 years old, she got hurt fighting with some boys her age. It was just a small scar on her kneecap, but Racheal became furious and went to fight with the mother of the boys. The argument grew out the proportions and led to physical altercations due to high adrenaline mixed with her addiction to sleep pills and alcohol. Well, she had a stroke. Emergency services were called. In fact, she was rushed to the hospital while Miranda was locked in their house watching all this from her locked window. Tony, who was at work, got a call from his sobbing daughter incoherently explaining what happened to her mother. Tony called his parents to take care of his daughter while he rushed to the hospital, and the journey would be vain since Racheal had passed away before reaching the hospital. He was just greeted with a dead body. This had broken their family apart, and Miranda was traumatized and did not want to go anywhere without her father, Tony. She had to go through a lot of therapy and simply be homeschooled while Tony tried to manage his business from home. Tony's own parents shortly passed away 2 years later. This left him feeling quite alone himself, but he tried his best to be there for his growing child. His friends had tried to set him up for a long time, and he never really connected with anyone. Instead of fixing his broken personal life, he just focused on working to distract himself. This is when Tony started consolidating his own parents' wealth to expand his already decently profitable business. This proved to be a very hectic idea and put him under extreme stress. Miranda, by this time, had grown confident enough to go back to school. She wanted to experience high school life, and that's where I met Miranda for the very first time. I was her history teacher in high school. She was a very quiet kid and never really interacted with any kids her own age. Also, teenagers have a lot of self-identity issues, so they tend to stick to their friend group as much as possible. Only after meeting Nicole did she change. I myself come from a very cozy home. My father himself was a lecturer at a community college, and my mother was a stay-at-home wife. I have a couple of brothers who were older than me, so I grew up as the princess of the house, and after I was born, my dad published some books that did really well. So that was the origin of my nickname. I grew up very sheltered while learning about the world, mostly through books and variegated houses. So my life was very uneventful and calm, and before Tony and I had dated about 3 guys, and the longest was for a few months. So the situation with Tony scared me. He was a decade older and had a kid who was my student. But the chemistry was undeniable and too thrilling for me to just not keep coming back for more. Even Tony did not cross the line for a long time because he was worried just associating himself with me. A year after the runaway incident, I had met almost all of Tony's close friends, and he had met mine. He even met my parents when they visited me over the summer break. My dad is a bit of a initiator, so he asked us very uncomfortable questions, but Tony was so darn charmingly confident to bully. I, on the other hand, was blushing like an orange. We knew if this continued, there would only be one way this would end. Well, it finally happened when there would be only one way, and Miranda turned 16. She started to worry about her future and college decisions, and she and Nicole had become very studious students who were regular of the top of their class. One night, when they were on a sleepover at Nicole's place, I went to visit them. I was feeling sad for some reason or the other, I can't even remember right now, and hearing Tony make fun of my problems made it easier for me to deal with. Even though he had come home that evening after a long day, we started sipping on some wine, and one thing led to another. When I woke up the next morning next to him, it felt like a huge weight had been lifted off my chest. We both had made sure to keep the whole ordeal a secret till Miranda graduated. We even kept it a secret from Miranda, too. After she graduated 2 years later, and we drove her to college and told her on the way, and yes, she seemed so excited that she started calling me Mom immediately. Well, I was embarrassed, even though I had been at her house regularly for nearly 4 years now. The next year, we got married. My parents held a huge wedding, and Tony's friends were quite happy to attend a wedding he genuinely wanted to have. Tony, in his wedding vows, told me to watch my back since everyone he knew had suffered some kind of issue. I promised him those days were over now that he's with Lady Luck, with me being his wife. But turns out I must have spoken too soon. We left for our honeymoon 2 weeks later, where I was injured, which permanently affected my ability to walk. I guess you could say I was lucky to be alive. Going from a girl who walks around everywhere to being reliant on a wheelchair, it felt so humiliating to me at first, and the accident was mostly my fault. We had gone to Colorado on a ski trip before flying off to Europe, and I have a horrendous body balance and hand-eye coordination in the first place. It took me nearly a year to learn how to cycle. I always wanted to rollerblade as a child, but never one fall convinced me to never try again. So, skiing in itself was quite scary to me, but Tony insisted that we just try it one time. So, we went there in the summer, and Tony, till his dying breath, regretted ever forcing me to go onto that trip. Basically, I was learning how to ski on beginner slopes with kids, and Tony turned out to be an expert skier. So he was trying his best to teach me, and I was making pretty good progress. A couple of days later, I was able to go through the beginner slopes and wanted a challenge, so I took the long cut meant for experienced skiers. This turned out to be the biggest mistake, since I had no idea how much momentum would be generated going at this high of speed down a hill. I remember losing control and screaming for my life, and Tony, who had been following me, tried his best to guide me to come to a halt. But I panicked and steered out of the path into a small cliff about 6 feet off the ground. The fall generally would not have hurt as much since there was enough snow for cover, but the ground had foliage of branches and stones. Fortunately, or well, should I say unfortunately, I landed on one of the snow-covered stones, back first, and skid off. I was immediately rushed to the hospital, and I woke up what felt like was weeks later to Tony holding my hand and sobbing. The fall had injured the lower part of my spinal cord, and my legs were severely injured from stabs by branches, so the doctor told me I simply might not walk again. They also gave me some hope that with enough physiotherapy and medication, I could achieve some form of strength back in them. Tony was so dejected and depressed about it, he felt responsible for the whole thing, even after everyone tried to tell him it was no way his fault. We tried our best to move on, though. I had to give up on going back to school as a teacher, and that bugged me a lot. I really enjoyed mingling and teaching the kids. It was a rewarding experience. My husband saw that he could solve this issue by creating an online teaching hub of sorts. So, Tony had multiple businesses at this point and wanted to set up a place where I could teach again. Like every other problem he faced in his life, he started diving into work. He set up a big online teaching hub, which came in quite handy during the pandemic era. He named the teaching hub after me and made it a non-profit venture, mostly funded by him. Eventually, it got a few more philanthropists to join, but the main goal was to reach children around the globe and just provide them with decent, necessary education. The hub became a huge hit, and I worked tirelessly to hire structure of the organization in a fair and just manner. After we started getting huge donations to the trust from even UN-backed organizations, we rapidly expanded into third-world countries and provided some virtual classes. This success was absolutely unprecedented, and even though Tony did not want to admit his, quote, lady luck was right, this was when my relationship with Miranda started to sour. She saw that her father had invested and built a huge organization around me. It made her feel neglected and a bit small, and she started getting these snarky, irritable remarks, and I had a nurse with me at all times just to help me with my daily chores and move around the house. Tony had hired the nurse specifically for me right after we got back home from the hospital. I tried my best to negotiate with her, but that sweet child was nowhere to be seen. She just saw me as a leech who was sucking up the fortune she had to inherit one day. No amount of talking from Tony or me could convince her. Right after college, she moved out of the house to live on her own and demanded a monthly stipend from Tony. He obliged, not wanting to alienate his only child, and I, for one, could not figure out how she had turned so bitter against her own family. But before we find a common ground, Tony passed away from a heart attack. This was heartbreaking to everyone around us. Both Miranda and I put aside our fights and differences to mourn and celebrate his life for a week. Then the lawyer read his will, which stated that Miranda and I would be jointly in charge of his business and trusts. But the online school hub would be directly under my jurisdiction. Well, let me tell you how mad this made Miranda, who thought she would be inheriting the whole deal without having to share anything. She hurled insults and caused a ruckus before swearing she would sue me for everything. So, the problem is my entire school is funded through the family trust that's technically owned by both of us, but we both have veto power as chairmen. This makes it very easy for her to slowly cut off my only source of survival by gathering allies. I had no clue how to run a multi-million-dollar business, so none of the partners or investors would ever choose me over an MBA Yale graduate like Miranda. Well, there's a bigger problem. If she files a lawsuit against the trust in school, since that will block all funding till the case is clear. This puts me in between a rock and a hard place, and I either give up everything and hope Miranda treats me well out of the goodness of her heart that seems to be lacking after the college, or sit and fight what seems like a losing war. So, I'm asking here what my best course of action should be. Everyone around me has some stake or the other in the fight, so I need a neutral third party's opinion. What's up, everybody? Mr. Racheal here. So today's story has 2 updates. And I'll just tell you right now, the first update, we're going to get to the bottom of this ordeal. If you guys are having a great day, let me know in the comment section how it's going. If you're new to the channel, go ahead, hit that subscribe button, and let's jump into update number 1. Hey guys! Thanks for the kind words about my ordeal in the comment section. This past 2 weeks have been very exhausting, to say the least. So, it took me a while to update you on all the developments. First off, after reading some suggestions about trying to calmly approach Miranda about having an equitable split of the wealth, I tried to set up a meeting. To my complete surprise, Miranda agreed. So, we prepared all the deals that were okay for me to accept with my lawyer. After spending a couple days organizing, we finally met at home with our lawyers and mediator investors. They were all trying to see who was capable of running the business smoothly, because the deal, well, we should strike. Miranda was a cheerful person in a good mood, but I did not see the necklace she always wore. This necklace was gifted by Nicole when they went their separate ways after high school. She wore it all the time, even on fancy occasions, so it being missing today told me a lot about the relationship at the moment. Soon, the lawyers started talking and negotiating on our behalf while I simply listened. Miranda had some demands she would reiterate once in a while, but she spent most of the time asking me about how my teaching was going. But the conversation had some sort of a sadistic tone to it. At the end, the lawyer could not agree on a deal, but we had made a sizable progress in figuring out how the split would go. Basically, I wanted complete ownership of the trust in school with a guarantee of a minimum donation from the business in exchange. I would completely give up equity and profits from all the business entirely. After the meeting, I asked Miranda about Nicole, but she tried to dodge the question. So I was sure something had happened between them, and I took it upon myself to figure it out further. I called up Nicole's mother, who told me she was working in LA as an agent. After some more talking, I was able to get her phone number. The next day I called Nicole and started off slow. She was happy to hear from me, so the conversation was easy to navigate. And eventually we struck the topic of Miranda's life. Nicole went silent for a bit and then went on a full rant about her. This is where I found out how and why Miranda had changed after college. So, Miranda is right now having a boyfriend who works as a trust fund investor. His name is Micheal. He's nearly 5 years older than Miranda. They met in college when he was an RA under a professor, and Micheal had started poisoning Miranda's mind about how after she left I would be convincing Tony to completely devote his wealth to me. This manipulation started off slow with him cutting her off from every close friend and family by repeated manipulation. Apparently, Nicole and Miranda had a huge fight right after college regarding Micheal. Nicole had advised her throughout to break up, but she stayed on. After the fight, Nicole had never heard back from Miranda, so she just assumed they weren't friends anymore. She did not even know about Tony's death. I had told Miranda to call Nicole, but she had deliberately lied to me. Now, I had a clear path of action. I was going to deal with this Micheal character, but first I had to find out more about him and their relationship as secret as possible. Update number 2. I know I said I would be updating you soon, but the last 5 months have gone by so fast, and I had completely forgotten about this thread. So, to continue where I left off, my main target was to find out more about Micheal. I contacted my husband's business friends, who I was close to, and asked them to find out more about Micheal. Only Jack agreed to search and tell me about it, and the others told me they did not want to get involved in a personal matter even though they loved Tony. Well, I understand, but if people figure out people are taking sides and investigating people, it might become an actual harassment lawsuit. Jack told me he had a guy who would find out everything about Micheal in 2 weeks' time. So, I waited 2 weeks and pushed meetings and negotiations citing personal health. Finally, I got a call from Jack at the end of 2 weeks, and he told me all about Micheal. Micheal was the second child of a small restaurant owner from Mississippi. He had grown up in middle class after getting to college and failing into the wrong crowd. So, he was turning into dealing weed and racketeering for money. This is how he found some dirt on a professor in Miranda's college, and he wanted a stable job for a while, so he threatened to hire him. Even though the research paper they produced was extremely lackluster and was not approved, he stayed as an RA till Miranda graduated. He was even rejected by one of Tony's companies after an interview, and all of this was incriminating enough, but turns out he had a child with an ex who now lived in Los Angeles. So by the looks of it, Miranda does not seem to know about the ex at least. I really don't want to threaten her using Micheal to reform our relationship. So, I called Miranda one day and told her I really wanted to talk to her. I asked her to do this as her last personal favor to me, and she unwillingly obliged. We met the same evening where I slowly started poking and prodding, and she was very defensive, rarely giving up any info, and eventually she started talking about Micheal and how they were planning on getting married soon after the deal. I just nodded and brought up her entire childhood and said, "You were just 13 or 14 when I saw you, shy and timid. Now look at you, a brave and confident woman about to get married. Your parents would be so proud. I'm so proud. You're sure about the guy, right?" I asked. There was a moment of hesitation in her voice, and I grabbed that moment instantly and started talking about failed marriages and abusive relationships I knew. And I quote, "Not everyone's like your father, you know. Many men try, but few succeed to become such lovable, responsible, kind men." Well, she then started talking about Tony, and with the slight push of a button, she was weeping. I cried with her, because I missed Tony so much, and at the end of the night, she asked me, and I quote, "Why did we ever fight again? Everything was nice. Where did it go wrong?" And not looking for an answer almost, then I broke it to her. You know, Nicole. Nicole had called the other day. She told me she just heard about Tony's death and she was sorry she could not make it here for the funeral. How long has it been since she spoke to you? Well, I asked and Miranda froze. Honestly, I have not spoken to her in years, and I don't want to as well. That jerk abandoned me after all that we've been through, she said while sniffling. Well, she said a very similar thing about you. Apparently you had a big fight with somebody, I can't remember. The person just broke your friendship and she was angry about it, I said slowly, nodding to see her reaction. Micheal? She always had a problem with whoever I dated. You know she told me to break up with him without ever meeting him in the first place. She makes me so mad. Well, maybe call her once more and clear things up. I put it out there hoping she would agree, but she just denied it. Just then, as a miracle of fate itself, Nicole called. She was in town and wanted to meet me. So I gave her the address and told Miranda about it. Miranda wanted to leave, not wanting to confront her old friend just yet, but I held her back, convincing her to mend the relationship like we had smoothed it over in the past few hours. Next, Nicole took over and they had a makeup fight, which was absolutely adorable. Eventually, Miranda was left with only one choice for the reasons behind her troubles she could trace back to. We filled her up with courage and sent her back home. 2 days later, I get a call from Miranda telling me that she completely broke it off with Micheal, and she did not want to continue breaking up Tony's lifetime of hard work anymore. I even spoke to my lawyer about dropping the entire case. Now, we live in the same house that she grew up in, and I'm just continuing to build the school to its full potential. Maybe sometimes people are just lost and need a hand of wisdom.
Alright guys, so this story, it had a lot of drama involved with it. I want to know your thoughts about it, your thoughts about Micheal, and how the story did end up ending. So go ahead, drop your comments down below. Here's the question though. If you were in OP's position, would you have handled this scenario the exact same way? I want to hear from you guys, so drop it down below. I'll see you in the comment section. If you guys are new to the channel, my name's Mr. Racheal. I narrate and animate stories every single day, and we cover so many topics. I hope to see you guys tomorrow. Smash that subscribe button, but do remember, it's cool to be kind. See ya.